By my reckoning, that's 12:30, so we're going to make a start. Welcome along to this BCS ISSG webinar event, which is an update on changes to Cyber Essentials. Just got a couple of slides to introduce the whole thing to you, and then I'm going to hand over to Neil, who's going to run the session for us today. Quick welcome and introduction to the BCS. BCS is obviously the Chartered Institute for IT. If you're not a member of the BCS already, you're very welcome to our webinar today, but we would encourage you very strongly to join us. There are some tremendous benefits to be had through being a member of the BCS. We have something like 67,000 odd members. Most of them are in the UK, but we are spread out over a number of other countries as well. Around about 150 countries, we have some representation. Here within the UK, we've got quite a number of local branches. I think there's about 50 of them, and there's about 50 odd specialist groups, of which we are one. We're the ISSG, the Information Security Specialist Group, something in the region of 3,500 members. And as you can see, we're concerned with pretty much anything to do with information or cyber security. So that's computer forensics, hacking, cloud security, just about everything in between. So if that's your bag, then make sure that you're joined up and linked into the ISSG. As a member of BCS, you can be a member of as many specialist groups as you like, but make sure you're clued into us. And our aim really, or one of our key aims, is to promote better information security practices and standards for both individuals and organizations. Hence this latest webinar today, which is the latest in a series of standards updates webinars that we've been running. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. It's a webinar, so we can't enforce Chatham House rule. So just be aware of that, please. We've got about 120 odd people registered to attend. So given those sorts of numbers, we can't really do Q&A as we go along. So what I would ask, please, is if you have a question that you'd like to ask Neil, what we would like you to do, please, is pop that into the Zoom Q&A, and Patrick Burgess, one of our committee members, will curate those, and he'll pose those Q&A at the end of the presentation to Neil. We'll allow about a quarter of an hour or so for Q&A, so there should be plenty of time for it. If we have more questions than we have time for, because we've got a fairly hard stop at 1:30, so if we do have more questions than we have time for, we'll collect them, we'll pose them to Neil by email, and then we'll make sure that they're emailed out to all of our registered attendees at the end of the event. If you have any questions about the running of the thing, then rather than pose a question through the Q&A, we've also got the chat open, and we've got Fox Thomas operating the chat for us, so she'll respond to any queries or chat around the session. Feel free to chat amongst yourselves using that, or to chat to ourselves who are running the session. One final point on all of that is that the whole thing will be recorded. It takes us about a couple of weeks to get that recording sorted out and edited, and then it'll be on the ISSG website for you to refer back to later. So without further ado, really, let me just introduce Neil Furninger. Neil has worked in IT support and cybersecurity for around about 20 years or more, and has extensive experience of working with a wide range of companies. He is, to use his term earlier, speaking from the horse's mouth today, because he works for IASME as the Cyber Essentials Manager, and he's a member of the IASME and the NCSC Joint Technical Working Group. So he's involved in just about everything to do with Cyber Essentials. He works with a wide range of organizations, scheme stakeholders, and certifying bodies to promote the technical strategy and improve the accessibility of Cyber Essentials. So we absolutely have the right guy on the call to tell us about the changes and to answer any of your questions about them. So just before I hand over to him, we've got a number of upcoming events coming up through the ISSG. The first one is on the 13th of April. We'll be sending some details out and inviting some of you to come and join us in the London office on the 13th of April to celebrate the fact that we've been around for 40 years, which is pretty good going. We've also got our Legal Day series. We've got some more standards events being planned, We've got some events on cloud security, and we're going to be doing some fairly regular updates, probably annual updates on where we're all at with post-quantum cryptography. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to invite Neil to start sharing his slides and to take over. And I shall talk to you all very briefly again just before 1:30 when we wrap up. Thank you. Neil.
Afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this presentation on the changes about Cyber Essentials. Just to give a bit more background about me, and thank you for the introduction there, Steve. I am, yes, the Cyber Essentials scheme manager at IASME. But to further clarify all that, really, I've been involved with Cyber Essentials now. I think it's 8 years. So I was originally an assessor. I've worked at a CB. In fact, I helped create that CB. And so I have done all aspects of the scheme. So I've been out in the field and tried to apply it with various organisations, etc., and used my experience from the 20+ year career I've had in IT support. And I used that to feed back into the Cyber Essentials Technical Working Group with the NCSC, which we sit once a week and design what comes up within Cyber Essentials and how it develops going forward. And I sit on a number of boards around the scheme to discuss the challenges and the roadmap going forward. So to be clear, Cyber Essentials is owned by the NCSC. They are and sit within or own and work alongside the new government department DCIT, who were formerly part of DCMS, and they are the actual owners of the scheme. And what we are, IASME, we are the sole delivery partner for the scheme. So we do all the administration of it. We train the certifying bodies. We train all the assessors. We manage all the assessments. We do the assessment moderations, etc., issuing of certificates. That's all controlled by IASME. And what I want to stress is it's very much, as it says in that logo, that's a new logo for us, by the way, because we've had our status upgraded to delivery partner, is that it's very much a partnership. We're not dictated to by the NCSC. We work very closely together with them, and we are in contact on a daily basis, discussing aspects of the scheme, how it should be applied, etc., etc. So it's very much a good partnership. But today is about a bit of a workshop to explain and clarify some of the details, etc., of the April 2023 changes, which were published back in January. There is a clarification I'm going to go into straight away, which has actually come into effect before April, which helps with the scoping of the scheme.
Neil, sorry to interrupt. It's
Yes.
Steve. I don't know if you're aware, your camera's not on. It's not obligatory, but feel free to turn it on if you want.
I'd quite happily turn my camera on. There we are. Okay, so the main changes here of what's going on with Cyber Essentials this year is, one, we've got a clarification on a level of device detail. That's the one that comes into immediate effect. We have some grace periods extensions to April 2023. I'll explain that further. We have clarifications surrounding when firmware is included within the scheme. There's been a lot of feedback about that over the last 12 to 18 months. We have clarification on third-party devices in scope. We're trying to help everybody, that's applicants and assessors and anybody who's got some involvement with CE or advising on CE, trying to help with when devices are in scope. Updates to device unlocking. We have an update to the malware protection based on feedback and changes in technology. And we have new guidance within the scheme about zero trust and asset management. So one of the biggest areas of feedback we have is about devices, the level of detail required for the devices, especially when we're talking about BYOD devices. And it's important to mention here, talk about BYOD or personal devices, just to clarify that they've always been part of the scheme since it was launched in June 2014, 2014. It was included then, it's documented in that original requirements document, but it is difficult to obtain all the information to add into the assessment. So there is a change of the level of detail required for user devices, and this does include servers. And it is here, and this is documented in a series of blogs that have taken place by IASME and the NCSC. So we are looking for, when we're talking about devices, so let's say laptops, desktops, servers, computers, tablets and mobile phones, when you're scoping the assessment, it asks for levels of detail. We are asking for the make and the operating system only. Okay. We were previously asking for the model, but we've had a lot of feedback to say that asking for the model is very time consuming and often not available through cloud services, etc., where you're collecting that data. So that level of detail, the model of a device, that has been dropped and is no longer required. However, when we're talking about firewalls and routers, which are part of the scheme, they are the boundary devices in a network. The level of detail is make and model. Okay, these can be attained. There's often not in the same quantities as the end user device, but the make and the model is enough to determine whether those devices are in scope and being supported. Okay. By asking for further details at the firmware levels, it's deemed a bit of a risk to store that data, and we're not prepared to store that data under advice that's been given by people within the NCSC. So we're just asking on firewalls and routers for make and model. All other devices, it is make and operating system. This applies with immediate effect and has been clarified in blogs. There was 2 released in January, one by IASME and one by the NCSC. And it will be the exact statement that's above is included in the new question set Montpellier. Okay, so when we released the question set Evandine in January 2022, we added some grace periods. Those grace periods apply to the Evandine question set for the life cycle of that question set. By that, you can only apply to use the Evandine question set up until the 23rd of April 2023, but you have 6 months to complete your assessment on that question set. So these grace periods, if you have applied before April the 23rd, 2023, you will be on the Evandine question set, and these grace periods extend until October the 23rd, 2023, the 6 months period that's there. But those grace periods will cease then, and when you apply on the Montpellier question set from April the 24th, 2023, the grace periods will no longer apply. The following grace periods just apply to Evandine. So that's the thin clients will need to be listed in the assessment and supported, but they will be not marked for compliance. The cloud services must have MFA on all standard user accounts. That is a grace period. Only that grace period on user accounts only applies on the Evandine question set from the 24th of April. On the Montpellier question set, both your administrators and your standard users must have MFA on their cloud services, but I will touch on this in a bit more detail later. Okay, and then there was a grace period about unsupported software, and this is a particular question A6.7 that still applies on Evandine until it is retired, as I say, in October, but you must have applied for it by the 23rd of April. So those grace periods are there on the Evandine question set. When a new Montpellier comes into play, these questions will be marked for compliance. One of the things we've done in the updated requirements is a clarification about firmware. It has been in the software definition for a long time now within the requirements when the definitions were first published in there. Then under the software, it was also deemed that firmware need to be kept up to date on all devices, etc. That's proved to be a particularly difficult and challenging one to assess and keep people up to date with on the determination, but it has been determined that the firmware in a firewall and a router is actually its operating system. So the firmware on those devices is included within the scheme, but firmware of your devices, such as your computers and your laptops, etc., we're not going to mark for compliance, and it doesn't need to be declared within the scheme. It is about trying to keep the firmware up to date. It is challenging. It is also in relation to whether the NCSC see threats to operating systems as the real threat, rather than threats towards firmware. But as we say, with firewalls and router, the firmware is its operating system, so it does apply to those devices, but we're not going to be checking for firmware on the other devices within the scheme. There's an awful lot of feedback about this. It causes a lot of discussion and confusion. So we're trying to take some confusion out the scheme here and hopefully make things a bit clearer. That we're only interested in the firmware being updated on your firewalls and routers within the requirements, which is currently 14 days. Another big area of discussion in Cyber Essentials is around third-party devices. So these are devices not directly owned by the applicant organization or are not controlled by some form of policy. We get lots of queries coming into IASME directly about when a contractor's device is in scope, whether it's in scope, whether a tutor at a university's device is in scope, and it's all about a question of ownership actually, and who has administrative access to it to apply the settings, and whether those settings are controlled by a policy or not. So we've come up with a table to try and help make this and clarify this a bit in an easier form to understand. But ultimately, whether a device is in scope or not when it's owned by a third party is controlled by the applicant organization and is not directly a problem of Cyber Essentials to solve, but we are giving advice on where we think it applies. So it's ultimately down to whether you have administrative and policy control over a device. Okay, so if you have you're an IT support company and you are doing somebody's IT support on your client certificate, it's their devices that are in scope, and it's up to them to decide whether they want to bring your devices into scope as the IT company. But ultimately, they don't have any administrative or policy right over that, so the IT support company's devices would be controlled through supply chain methods of asking for compliance, etc. It's a difficult area, and it's been we have enormous amounts of feedback on this, so we've tried to devise a table to help, and here's the table. I want to stress one area that's really important here that causes an awful lot of discussion, and it's around student devices. And this is certainly in the further education, the higher education sector, where the students are using their own personally owned devices to carry out their studies, etc., and whether they're in scope. It has been for a long time that student devices, when they're personally owned or BYOD, they are not in scope of Cyber Essentials, simply for the fact that it is extremely difficult for any organization to track student devices. It's always been that requirement, but we would always say that you would give some form of advisory policy out or something like that to your students, because ultimately the controls of Cyber Essentials, very much fall in line with other schemes that the NCSC do. So there's a number of the controls in Cyber Essentials are on the Cyber Aware program, and it would be advisable that anybody would follow the guidelines and the requirements of Cyber Essentials on their own devices. So it would be an advisory area that you give to students, but they don't have to directly comply with the requirements of Cyber Essentials. But you can see we've tried to cater for various types of employees, volunteers, trustees, etc. And you can see we set it out in various divides of ownership. So for third party, like an IT support company's organization owned device, that would be up to the third party to decide and determine, but you as the applicant would decide how you control that within your supply chain. That is not the responsibility of Cyber Essentials, because these are about the controls about those ones who have ownership or some form of policy control over them. Okay. I want to provide you, this is an update about device unlocking that's in the scheme. This has been, this was a new requirement in January 2022 under the Evandine version and version 3.0 to the requirements. But as it came to light, as we knew as we implemented this, we didn't have the full data to understand how this is configured on various manufacturers or vendors, but there are a couple of mobile device vendors out there who don't allow any configuration of this device unlocking requirement, particularly when it comes to brute force requirements. So in the Samsung world, we have brute force requirements. They are on the device, but they don't directly fit with the control set out in Cyber Essentials. In Cyber Essentials, the brute force requirement determines if you have configuration control over the device, you need to set the device to be locked out after 10 failed login attempts or via a throttling mechanism. But Samsung don't allow this. That's one of the vendors. There's another vendor as well. They don't allow this. They have set a default themselves, which cannot be changed or not cannot be configured by anybody. But rather than 10, they have 15 failed logon attempts, and then device will log out. So not to penalise people who use Samsung devices and the other various manufacturers who may not allow this configuration, but those devices, that is allowable in those instances. When a device can have this requirement configured, it needs to meet those requirements that are outlined in the requirements document. I hope that makes sense. We had a bit of pushback on this, that we were penalising people because they couldn't do it with these certain vendors, but we don't want to do that. And we understand that sometimes within the scheme, there are certain controls that you have absolutely no control over. And in this particular case, with this Samsung for sure, and a couple of others, you just cannot change this setting. So we're not going to penalise companies for that. And that is outlined within the document. Malware protection update. This is probably the biggest update this year, and it's basically to allow acceptance of a technology change out there, where we're saying that we allow and accept anti-malware solutions or malware protection solutions software that don't have signature-based software and rely on AI or behavioral scanning as their only method of giving protection. There are a number of providers out there that do this, and we've had feedback from those providers that was saying that we were penalising their organisations again. So we've adjusted the scheme to accept these products. And what we're saying is now, rather than ask for daily updates or daily signature updates, we're asking that these products are now configured to the vendor's best practices. So we know a number of these AI and behavioral scanning solutions don't offer daily updates. They're often a longer period of time, but it's because of the way they are providing protection is not in the same format than the traditional signature based. So we've dropped signatures from it, but it doesn't mean we're saying you can't use a signature based program. We're just trying to accommodate these next generation solutions. Another important change here is that we've removed the sandboxing option. Sandboxing is a difficult area, but it was under the advice of the subject matter experts at the NCSC that we couldn't just generically accept all sandboxes as being a malware protection. And often it's very difficult to determine whether they are offering malware protection, but it's down to the security and the efficacy of those particular solutions, whether generically we could accept all of those solutions in a very generic format as being a good malware protection, and there really wasn't the evidence coming back from the subject matter experts to allow it to sit there. There are often many uses of sandboxing, but the security to actually identify it as a clear security solution was something the SMEs at the NCSE couldn't agree on. So it was better to remove that option and rely on what now is the use of malware protection software and an application approved list, which are the two options. We do offer slightly more options within that requirement now, and that will be outlined again shortly. Now, because of these changes, it means there's going to be some changes to the CE Plus audit, and this will mean there will be some manual testing of the malware protection, because there is no known test files that are independent to test the next generation solutions, whereas the signature based ones, there are independent test files out there. But we are looking into this for future to see if there is some organization or whether there will be something like this that we can provide at a later date. But the outline for the testing for a CE Plus audit on this section was fed back to all Cyber Essentials assessors, all Cyber Essentials Plus assessors, and we were very positively met. So the outline of those tests are now in the CE Plus illustrative spec document, which is publicly available on the NCSE website to see what methods are allowed to do those manual checks. And they will be testing on these from when the first Montpellier question sets go through for CE Plus, and there may be further changes to this particular area as the scheme develops, because we need to get the evidence coming back from the testing in the field. Now, that's the actual changes over and done with, but there is two areas we're offering more guidance on. The guidance is a new thing to it because we realize that Cyber Essentials doesn't cover everything. It's never designed to cover everything. It's the building blocks. It's the first rung on a ladder to an organization building a cybersecurity regime within their organization. But one area we are increasingly getting lots of talk about and discussions about is zero trust. Okay, so there has been a mapping exercise to a zero trust model. Now, very clearly, the zero trust model is the one in use by the NCSC, the National Cybersecurity Zero Trust Model, which was published. And there is two independent teams, the Cyber Essentials and the Zero Trust. The Zero Trust team did an independent mapping of the controls they've outlined in their model to Cyber Essentials, and the Cyber Essentials working group, which I'm part of, did a mapping exercise the other way around. So we went back to the Zero Trust. It was totally independent. We held meetings over it. We planned long meetings over it, but they found that there's a complete and utter correlation between the two. Basically, the only difference is that there is no logging and monitoring within Cyber Essentials, but all the elements of Cyber Essentials and the controls of Cyber Essentials are outlined in the Zero Trust guidance. So what we've done is we put a little bit of guidance in there, included a mapping to it, or a link, sorry, to the Zero Trust article within the requirements. But there is advice that really states that if you're adopting a zero trust model, the conclusion is you're also adopting Cyber Essentials. We had many companies come to us and say, we're doing zero trust, so we don't apply the Cyber Essentials controls. But actually, if you look and delve into the NCSE model on zero trust, there is direct correlation between the two, and the controls of Cyber Essentials would need to be applied to have an effective zero trust model in place. Another area that often comes up for discussion within Cyber Essentials is about the scoping and the understanding of what devices are in your organization. So there's now a new area of asset management in the guidance. It is not a direct control of Cyber Essentials, but is considered to underpin all 5 technical controls within the scheme, because you must understand which devices you're going to put the controls on. So there's been a link added to the NCSE asset management guidance that's been included. And this is very much in addition, it's been based on a trend being observed not only by IASME, but also the NCSE when they are dealing with incidents and various other issues that come up from organizations and feedback they're getting, but especially from the incident management team, who have stated that organizations are not fully in control and understanding what assets they have in place. So to add asset management into this is very important. There have been evidence coming back for those incident management teams to state that some organizations have been attacked with servers maybe that were in scope or could have been considered in scope, but actually they weren't aware they still existed on the network. And actually, those were the devices that were attacked. In some instances, we're talking about 2003 servers, etc., in scope, or they were the entry point for an attack. So it's very important to get a handle on your assets. We're not only talking about physical device assets, we're talking about your software assets, we're talking about identity assets, etc. And that is very much, again, a key part of the zero trust model. So this is just falling in line with general guidance. It is not a specific control, but it will make your journey through Cyber Essentials a lot easier if you have a handling on your asset management. Now, due to the changes and additional guidance, there are some question set changes to the scheme. So the question set has been matched to version 3.1 requirements. They were released in January, on January the 24th, exactly the same day as the Montpellier question set was released. The question set language usage has been changed, which is exactly the same as the requirements, based on feedback and in a more plain English style. And applicant guidance articles have now been linked from the question set. Okay, so there's an article for all 5 control areas and scoping. So there's 6 linked articles out of the question set and through the assessment platform. And the requirements document has changed its order of controls to match the question set ordering, so they can be worked on side by side. That's something that's been addressed, and feedback was given on that. Well, just want to touch again on about the appliance guide, the applicant guidance articles. That is just the beginning of a larger project where we're going to do a lot more about CE guidance in the public domain and provide a CE knowledge library via the IASME website. That's something for the future that we hope to have up and running as soon as possible. and where these first 6 articles will be, but it allows us to expand and talk about Cyber Essentials and give Cyber Essentials guidance directly to the public. So that is it, because we have an assessor guidance section, an assessor knowledge base, and that's closed to them at the moment. But we've recognised there's an issue that for consistency of the scheme, a lot of that advice would be better made being public, and the same knowledge being made available to applicants, implementers, advisors, and assessors of the scheme generally. So that's trying to make the scheme more consistent. And just to mention, this very presentation, these exact same slides are being presented to assessors and groups like yourself. And when we've done more public presentations, this exactly the same presentation is being presented to all organisations and all assessors and certifying bodies for the scheme. So everybody's getting identical information this time round. But actual question set changes, there's a few little changes here, okay? There's a question about home workers. That's now been deemed better to be in the actual scope section rather than the information section. So there's a new question there, which is A2.7.1. Now, a big area we do have around questions is MFA questions, and they we have questions in there, 4 questions about MFA on cloud services. The first 2 questions will be information only going forward. You will not be marked down, or you will not fail an assessment. Let's put it that way. You will not fail an assessment if you have a cloud service that does not offer an MFA solution. However, you will be marked down on A7.1 and A7.17 for compliance because you're using a cloud service that doesn't offer MFA. But what we're saying is you don't have control over your cloud services often, because sometimes they are dictated to you through contract, etc. So we cannot penalize you because you cannot force a cloud service to provide MFA. Okay, so we're not going to do it as an automatic fail on the MFA questions if a cloud service doesn't offer any form of MFA, and it's clear any form of MFA. Okay, it's been a controversial one to talk about. We have an awful lot of feedback about it, but we do recognize it's very difficult for a lot of organizations to put pressure on cloud services to add an MFA solution. This is based on a lot of evidence we've got and collected over the last 12 months when we're trying to discuss cloud services, and we introduced it into the scheme. And it's an area of development and something we're talking about. We're hoping we're going to provide even more feedback to very common cloud services that don't offer MFA, and IASME ourselves will provide feedback to those vendors. So will the NCSC, especially when it's related to a government contract or a public sector related contract. When it's more private sector, we will start, and IASME will get involved and start to tackle these organisations, because the use of MFA is something that is very important and a key policy article that follows through NCSE guidance throughout many of their guidance articles, and it's certainly very prominent in their cyber aware scheme, which is for all citizens, but it's also for the business community. It's very important that you have MFA on your solutions. For all the multiple choice questions, we have added a none of the above explanation, so you can give further explanation on why you're not doing some of the multiple choice answers. That's something else that's new to add to it. It will be examined and we can monitor trends through it, but for currently, if you do use a none of the above, it will be a non-compliant answer. And A1.8, which is an information requirement from the NCSC, more detail is now required at the request of the NCSC. So there's a bit of an expansion of that question.
Hi, Neil. Sorry to
Okay.
interrupt. Just
Yeah.
wanted to give you a little time check. We're just on 1:10 at the moment, so we're planning on going to Q&A sometime soon after 1:15, if that still works for you, okay?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. I've got a couple of slides to go only. Okay.
Cheers.
So just to give you some timelines here. So the documents that were related to the scheme, so that's the new requirements, new question set, was published on the 23rd of January this year. So you're working now, or will be from April the 24th, you'll be working on the version 3.1 CE requirements. The question set was published slightly later due to a very late change in the NCSE, but it is publicly available on the IASME website and linked to from the NCSE website, and it's called Montpellier. And the go live for this is the 24th of April, 2023. And just to clarify, there's some requirements in the language change. We had some feedback from a particular commission that stated it wasn't in a very plain English format. We've reacted to that, and it's been rewritten, hopefully to make it easier. We've already had some very good feedback on that feedback and those adjustments that have been made, not only by IASME, but the technical writers at the NCSE, to make it more understandable for all applicants. And just to finish it off, just to clarify some of these changes, okay, there's been a series of blogs issued by the NCSE. So there's one about debunking some myths. There's one about the grace period extensions, because that was made public before Christmas. And there's obviously an update blog from the 23rd of January. Now, there is a second blog to match that, which is available from the IASME website, which goes into some of the explanation of the changes. And there we are. That's the end of the presentation. If you have questions and feedback on the new changes, we welcome that at IASME, and we do feed it back into the NCSE regularly. I certainly do. I talk about it an awful lot with them, and it is a core element of my role that we react and work with the feedback that we get on the scheme. So there's my contact details, and if you can contact info@ for general support on the scheme as well. Thank you.
Neil, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you very, very much indeed. Now, I know that Fox and Patrick have been monitoring the chat and the Q&A. Patrick, can I hand over to you for a little while for the Q&A?
You most certainly can, Steve. Thank you. And yeah, lots of questions coming in, and thank you, Neil, for that. Really helpful to understand the changes coming up and the mindset behind some of those changes as well, because I think that's really important for everyone to understand. So we've got quite a few questions. So some of them will be quite quick answers, hopefully. Some of them may be a bit more thought-provoking. We'll see. But to start with, I think you were right. I mean, certainly having implemented Cyber Essentials myself, there was a lot of confusion around devices over the last year or so as to how much data needs to be gathered. One of the things that needed, and a couple of people asked the question, is that it was all about not only the warranty, but sort of whether the supplier was going to continue to provide updates to the software. So sort of how long they were under coverage for, if that makes sense. So a couple of people have asked here that obviously we can provide the model numbers and the OS numbers. That's sort of fine, but sort of does it matter now whether that OS is running the latest version of it or the latest patch of that version of it? Do we need to report to that level? Or is it just sort of Android 10, Android 11, those kind of levels?
No, yeah. Okay, let me tackle this. This is area confusion. All the devices need to be using a supported operating system.
Cool.
So if you're talking about Microsoft, you're talking about Windows 10 and Windows 11 now on those devices. And if you're talking about Android, okay, we'll tackle that one first. It's Android 11, 12, and 13. It looks like Google have dropped support now for Android 10 in their most recent security update. On the Android security update side, there is no mention of Android 10, so it looks like that's gone out. And then when we're talking about iPhones, iOS, this is the most confusing one, because thank you, Apple don't publish this information when they actually go end of life, but that could change later this year. We're accepting 15 and 16, but I would expect to see 15 drop off the radar very soon, but they don't publish end of life of that. We don't want you, obviously the way the scheme is set up, when you must have a supported operating system on a device for that to be in scope. And if you don't have a supported operating system, that will cause an automatic failure. Yes,
Sure.
ideally, the scheme is promoting that you have whichever supported operating system on its latest patch version because of the 14-day patching requirement. But we're not asking for that level of detail. We want to know if you've got the ability to get the latest patches on there. So that's where we're saying. So
That's
if you
a really
said
good
Windows
clarification.
7,
Thank you.
so if you had Windows 7, you're not you just to have that on the latest set of patches, because there'll be no more patches for Windows 7. That isn't acceptable because it's actually dropped out of support completely. So I hope
that makes a lot of
clears
sense.
all that up.
That does, absolutely. And just to clarify that in my head, so because we used to you used to have to support both on the Windows side as well. You sort of we're on H2 blah 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 version, if that makes sense. And that it's more now we've got 50 Windows 11 PCs. That's what they are.
Well, no, I think we have to clarify this. This is what causes the confusion. That the vendors have different ways of doing it, don't they?
Yeah, of course they do.
And whatever. And in the Windows 10 and Windows 11, you still got to have the correct feature version in place because they only support 3 feature versions at a time.
Yep.
That's a Microsoft decision.
But then it's not the individual patch levels of those Windows of that feature version.
No.
And then the same for the Androids. You're looking at being on version 12, but then you're not worried about knowing about the monthly patch levels.
No, I don't want you to give us that details, but you accept later that you're patching it within 14 days. 100%. That's a different question later. I just want to clear up that Windows 10 bit because just before the pandemic, they dropped this 18-month support thing in for some of the feature versions, certainly in the home and professional world of those. They had an 18-month limit. Those you can't have 1609 on a machine and say that's acceptable because it's not receiving any security updates. And that's the key here. And it's a principle of Cyber Essentials. Your operating system must still be receiving high and critical security updates to be acceptable for Cyber Essentials on a regular basis. That's
really helpful. Thank you. I think that really clarifies that now. And also the way that it's split into 2 kind of questions now, which is really helpful. So the first question is you have to have a version that can be updated and on it. And the second one is you're saying we are updating them, and therefore
because the control is your update process, which is what is in the security update management. But to be in scope in a network or in use connecting to cloud services, you must be using a supported operating system.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. Thank you. We've also had a question from somebody, and they've said that if they have a server or a device or something that is on an unsupported OS, but it's not connected to the internet, or it's sort of behind something that's proxied away or separated out, and they put additional protections around that. It may be because they've got to have a legacy piece of software in the network. It's got to be there for archiving or purposes. Is that still an immediate fail if that exists and they've got no way around it? Is there a way that that can be handled?
Now, if you're using we call it subsetting in Cyber Essentials because there's different ways you can subset, but the subset phrase is device Cyber Essentials, but it's actually network segmentation. If you've got an unsupported operating system, we want to see it in a separate network segment, effectively 2 hops away from the internet. If your main network is connected to the internet, you can create a second network in the background with another firewall or a VLAN boundary, and you put that unsupported software there. It's a far more complex attack to get through that second hop
environment.
That's ultimately what it is. We're interested.
And would that be out of scope? Or would that be in the scope of it? So you would then say that the scope would exclude that piece that's out of the conversation.
Yeah. If that second hop, right, there's 2. If the second hop in that network segment that has the unsupported in has no internet access on it, you can gain whole company certification. If it has, and you have internet on that second hop, that segmented network, you can apply for Cyber Essentials, but you can't get whole company. You'll need to include an excluding statement. We see this a lot. We know there's a lot of this out there. But the key thing here, where there's a difference between what we do with cloud services and the MFA, you've got no control over the MFA requirement, but every organization can do a bit of networking to segregate those legacy products out.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
We've had a question from one of the people about MFA, for where they maybe have an application in-house themselves. So
yeah,
maybe they've got an application that they provide to clients for themselves. It's a self-internally developed platform.
okay, yeah,
Maybe they're saying, we understand that it would be good to have MFA on that, but maybe they don't for whatever reason at the time. Is that something which you guys would, if it's them providing it, it's kind of a cloud-based platform by them and it's in their network? How would that get assessed across your environment if they haven't got MFA platform within it?
It is obviously that organization's decision to decide what authentication methods they've got, but the authentication should fit the guidelines that's in the password-based requirements, which are in the document. So you can use either MFA, or you have, you need to have those brute force protections. So you need to have those in place. And if you don't, you're going to have a 12-character password. But
Yeah,
you still need the brute part. You'd still have to have the brute force protections in place. So you've got those three methods we talk about the use of passwords and protecting them. So they're protecting with MFA, or you're protecting them with a automatic password deny list, or you have a 12-character password at minimum. Obviously, if you're exposing it to the internet and you're treating it as a cloud service, the guidance would say, it's not a requirement, but the guidance would say you need to be really doing MFA by now.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Considering MFA, but it's not that's your decision which method you use.
Yes. Okay. That makes
sense. We're not dictating you must have MFA, but it would be advisable you put MFA on it. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. That makes sense. Someone's been talking more about the cloud services as well, specifically where the cloud services are more of a global thing, and the Montpellier questions seem to be bringing that more into scope if you're scoping that. And if you've got a piece of cloud infrastructure which maybe stretches over multiple boundaries, how do you handle that with regards to sort of scoping it for Cyber Essentials, which may be a UK based kind of thing? Is it something that we're looking to wall off the UK infrastructure and maybe build that separately? Are we able to then do we have to bring in everything outside of the UK if it's part of the same environment that the UK are using? And does that then, from a scoping perspective, make it an everything thing? How does that work?
This is actually something that we thought about when we actually introduced cloud services last year. The actual requirement is obviously unless it's a segregated tenant. So let's take Microsoft Office 365, for instance. If you have a tenant that is just UK only, for just UK only users, okay, that's fine. The issues come when you've got a worldwide tenant, so you've got multiple, so they've got a nice segregated network in the UK, you can get CE on that, but they share the same cloud tenant with their clients in France, the rest of the organization in France, I should say. The requirement is, and it is a healthy byproduct of this, is that the whole tenant needs to have MFA on it. Okay, fine. Does that make sense? We can't be granular on that setting and just say just the UK, because somebody in France, if they don't have MFA on it and their password's compromised, it's compromising those UK users as well. So you need to put it tenant wide.
Okay, and you could, I guess you could segregate as well, right? So if you had to, you could have a UK tenant in Office 365 and a France tenant, and then put that out exactly if you wanted to. Okay, fine, thank you. That's really helpful.
But I can tell you from experience, we tried to do this in IASME. We've got a community area, and then we've got a certification area. We actually tried to run two tenants side by side for various reasons, and found it nigh on impossible to do it. Extremely administratively intensive, so the decision was that we'd have one, and it is a great byproduct to have, isn't it? Great absolutely. Outcome to make sure everybody on that tenant is using MFA.
Yeah, it's pushing the scope. It's increasing the scope, isn't it? And it's just then having to deal with that nuance.
But it's only the scope of the cloud service, and
Yeah.
which one's easier to do? Turn it on for everybody with one tick in the box, or start going through granular based on where people are located?
Yeah.
It's very difficult. Obviously, you can do network segmentation. That's slightly different because, but it's the segmenting tenants in products like that is very, very difficult.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Yeah. That's very cool. Another question from someone about SaaS cloud and MFA. They're saying that if that provider doesn't provide MFA, so let's say you're stuck with a provider for one reason or another, you can't move away from them immediately. They haven't got MFA. You'll make that call. That's still something that they're going to declare to you, right, on the questions that they have that, but this provider doesn't provide it. So they have. Yeah. So it still needs to be put into the thing, and it just needs to be a case of outside our control. We don't do that.
Yeah, because ultimately the reason for that is we want to use that so we can build a picture, so we can start to use that as evidence to put pressure on cloud service providers.
Yes. Okay, that makes sense. I get that. So you can use that and gather that information as to how many people are using.
But we can't accept the fact that we can't just make it, you can't, you know, you're going to have to accept you can't apply MFA. Can I just cover the one area that's also difficult about this is that MFA, when we're talking about Cyber Essentials, we're talking about it's not their own mechanism. So if they share a mechanism, so if you have multiple products like, say, Atlassian products that can use the Azure authentication in MS365, you need to configure on your Atlassian products to use MS365 to do the authentication. Okay, so if you can share an authentication method that uses MFA, you should be using that and not saying it hasn't got MFA because you actually have a solution. The other one that's also a bit controversial, and I'm sorry about this one, if you're being asked to pay for it as an additional option, you'll have to pay for it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it's still
that's
there,
not
right?
our choice. That's not Cyber Essentials' choice. Unfortunately, that's the vendor's choice. But there are, with time, it should be dropped. It's not. It doesn't feel right. But from a Cyber Essentials point of view, you still have an option to apply it, and you need to put it in place. I don't think there's anybody disagrees with putting MFA in as a cybersecurity control.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, we're going to have to give Steve a minute or so at the end to have a chat. So we'll a couple more questions, maybe see if we can get yes/no answers on them. I'm going to phrase them in that way. So one question that we've had from someone is on reviewing Cyber Essentials, on receiving a Cyber Essentials certification, an organization can afterwards apply for the IASME Cyber Assurance Standard, which what constitutes assurance as distinct from its previous name of governance? Does that make sense to you, that question?
Yes, it does make total sense. It's just a renaming, really. It still offers the same kind of protections, that service. It's handled by a completely different team, and I'm separate to that. But it's just been updated, and as part of that update, it was decided to change the name a little bit, to rebrand it, and we're getting great traction with it.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we may have to answer some of these questions afterwards, Steve. If there's a couple more that we need to get back out, we will send answers out if we can to everybody afterwards. Someone's asked, Bob's asked, if he does the Cyber Essentials assessment on the 15th of April, given the dates and these things you mentioned, and bases it on the Montpellier set of requirements, can he then do the Cyber Essentials Plus audit in May on the same set of controls? Or does he need to upgrade to the new set of controls? I think it means the other way around. That maybe doing an Evandine before, and then would he be assessed on Montpellier for the Plus like after that date?
No, you'll be assessed on the Evandine question sets. You'll be assessed on what verified self-assessment question set you have applied on. So if you do it on Evandine, you'll be set against the requirements of Evandine.
And if you wanted to do Montpellier on the Cyber Essentials Plus, which might be what he means, could he assess against Montpellier on the 15th of April, if that's when he needs to get Cyber Essentials?
No, you would need to do it on the 24th because the portal won't be open until the 24th of April.
So if, for example, maybe, I don't know the context of this, Bob's Cyber Essentials expires on by the 15th of April, he would have to have maybe 7 days and wanted to be on Montpellier. He'd have to have 7 days wait and then reapply on the Cyber Essentials. Okay, fine.
Yeah, that's right,
Okay, I hope that answers your question, Bob. Great. Okay, there are a couple of other questions we haven't got to yet, but we will send out emails because I need to hand back to Steve to wrap up, and we do like to finish properly. Thank you, Neil, for everything. Really helpful and really clear.
That was absolutely brilliant. Yes, thank you very much. We'll grab those questions and we'll get them across to you, Neil, in an email, and then we'll send something out to all of the people who were registered for the session today. So I think the combination of the presentation, which answered lots of people's questions and just provided them with facts, with the combination of that with the Q&A that you've been doing with Patrick, has been absolutely fantastic today. So what I'd just like to do is remind everyone that we've got some other things coming up. We've got the 40th anniversary event coming up on the 13th of April, and we're just in the final stages of getting the planning out for that. So we'll be coming out to anyone who is a member. Bear in mind, please, if you're not a member of the BCS or the ISSG, it really is worth joining. There is a discount code that's available for you for your first year, I think. So please do get in touch with us if you're not a member. We'd love to have you. We've got a whole pile of other events planned for the coming sort of weeks and months. So just keep your eye. If you're a member of the group, then you'll receive calling notices for all of those things as we go along. And then really just to sort of wrap up with a final thank you to Neil for your time and expertise today. It's been really, really good. And we hope that as Cyber Essentials continues to change and evolve, then we can invite you back on a regular basis to update us on those changes.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Thank you very much indeed. We're going to call it a day now because we try and close on time. So thanks, everyone.